Take it away, Chelsea.
Okay, so hey guys, my name is Chelsea. Chelsea Marie. It's hyphenated. Friends call me Chelsea, whatever. But I'm here in Sacramento, and so we actually met via a mutual friend because we were just chit chatting on I guess the same topics. We happened to touch base on the same wavelength.
Can guys and girls be just friends? I've already been like tweeting the past few months about uh, platonic relationships versus romantic relationships, and a lot of you may have already seen my my YouTube video about the 8 forms of Greek love. And I was explaining how like love comes in various different forms that even the Greeks already like knew about, and how looking at the world in a very two-dimensional way is just not real. And so the idea of guys and girls, like, just seeing things like just seeing a relationship between guys and girls is just platonic or just romantic, I think is a very black and white and just like limiting view of being able to see things in general. Like the way that we relate is like very interlayered. And essentially, I was also saying that our limited view on all of this is keeping us from being able to have thriving relationships with each other. And again, I don't just mean like romantic relationships, but I mean mostly platonic relationships. Because in my opinion, it seems like whenever platonic relationships, especially with those of the opposite gender, start going to a certain level of depth, then people automatically, like what I'm thinking about is like that meme with the guy who's like waiting, like for like a butterfly is like coming to him or something. I don't know if you're familiar with
Right.
it. Yeah, and then he's like, "Is this romantic?" Like that's what I'm thinking of right now. And it's like, no, that doesn't mean it's romantic. It just means y'all
Right.
having a deep connection. But I think that people have confused depth of connection for romance, and a lot of times, like it really is romance. So I'm not saying that it never is, because clearly there is such thing as a romantic relationship. But I feel like a lot of times it's really not. It's just the depth of connection that you're having, but people can I guess not really see it the way that it should be, and they'll make something into something that it's not supposed to be, and it'll just soil it altogether.
And this is purely my opinion, but I do feel like when it comes to platonic relationships, like you said, when we reach past that deep, when we get towards that deep connection, a lot of people get confused
Mm-hmm.
on whether or not it's like romantic. But sometimes I do feel like it has to do with someone's emotional immaturity, because you have to be able to recognize, like, okay, so who is this person? And what how are they in my life, like what is the reason they're in my life, right?
Mm-hmm.
So like, is it just like a reason type of relationship? Is it a seasonal type of relationship, or is it just strictly supposed to be something that is a lifetime type of relationship? And so a lot of the times, because of the huge chasm that we have between men and women, where women think one way and then the guys think another way,
Mm-hmm.
all of that gets so confused, and we tend to overthink it. If you lack the ability to heal your brokenness, you immediately jump into relationships at the first connection that's made, and you're not
Mm-hmm.
really thinking it through, like, okay, well, maybe this can't just be a friendship, or maybe it should just stay a friendship. A lot of the times, if we have, as women, if we have emotional wounds, sometimes we just immediately offer, sex in a relationship, and we just force lifetime scenarios on things that should strictly stay platonic.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and and I think when you have those relationships that kind of I guess go beyond their the appropriate boundaries, then that's when two individuals end up hurt, and then that emotional wound that you never healed becomes, like I told you, it becomes infected, and then you start spreading that to some other person, and then
Mm-hmm.
that's where this whole women are trash, men are trash mentality comes in, because we're so hurt. We're hurt. We're not healing those emotions because we're trying to bandage everything up, and based off of some deep connection that shouldn't have went towards a romantic path in the first place.
Yeah, yeah,
So
yeah. So, for example, people could be in a platonic friendship, but then
yeah.
able to objectively, like, like, or impersonally, just uh, find someone to be attractive. And I feel like
Yeah.
that's like, yeah, like that's like understandable. Like, okay, but then actually being attracted to that person, like that's a different thing. And then the next thing is, what are you going to do like with that attraction even? So I feel like the first thing that I mentioned, where it's like you can just see, oh yeah, that person's like they're attractive. In
Mm-hmm.
my opinion, that's different from being attracted to the person. I feel
Yes.
like when you notice that you are attracted to the person, then now it's probably like a level where maybe it's like this is probably like where we get that whole like, oh, people of the opposite gender can't be friends because somebody's always going to end up attracted to the other, which I personally don't think is true. I think it's common that that happens, but
Mm-hmm.
I don't think it happens as frequently as we may think it does, because again, I feel like it's just the depth of connection that all of a sudden makes the people start thinking that they are actually attracted to each other.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but even so, if you're self-aware enough to know, like, no, this is like an actual attraction to that person, it's not just
Mm-hmm.
like depth of connection.
Yeah.
Now, okay, so you're aware of that. That's good. Now you have to start practicing that self-control. Like, what are you going to do about it? I remember that we had talked about this a little bit
Mm-hmm.
in the Twitter DM, and
Yeah.
I brought up Bridge to Terabithia. And for those
Yeah.
of you who haven't seen it, then spoiler alert, Leslie dies. And it broke my 13, 12-year old. I don't remember how old I was, but I
It's
was a
too
young.
emotional.
It was torture. I did not expect it. I didn't see it coming at all. I was like in denial. It just really surprised me. But Leslie was, so there's like two characters. There was Justin and there was Leslie. And just before Leslie came, he was like very lonely. He seemed depressed. Like he didn't really like talk to anybody at school. He was very stoic. He just seemed to just draw in his book. Like that was the only amount of imagination that he had. His only like outlet. Then this new girl comes to school. She's also his next door neighbor. And she's like just full of life, and like she's like always like being kind to him even when he wasn't being kind back to her. Then they create this like whole imaginary world. It was almost like Rugrats even, where they like have this imaginary world where they can just be
Mm-hmm.
themselves in the woods called Terabithia, and
Mm-hmm.
they start drawing closer and closer to each other. And
Mm-hmm.
you could see that they're like building a strong kinship, like they have a very strong bond. And it, to me, it went past like, just being like, oh, boy, girl, they need to get
Right.
together kind of thing. To
Yeah.
me, it just seemed like strictly, maybe strictly is too strong of a word, but like it
Mm-hmm.
just seemed like what should have been a very like platonic but strong, deep connection with each other
Mm-hmm.
that they were having. That could have
Right.
even probably been created even if Jeff had like another
Mm-hmm.
guy there. We talked about then like how Leslie, like we said, like she dies, and Jess was like devastated. And one thing that I brought up, I was devastated, but one thing I brought up was that just like what you said, like she wasn't meant to be there forever. Because
Right.
after
Yeah.
Leslie came into his life, then he
Mm-hmm.
started having more life. He started like being more creative. He started like being more outgoing. You start seeing him even treat his teacher differently, the teacher that he rarely spoke to, like all of these different things start happening in his
Mm-hmm.
life to make him like just a kind of like different person. And it's like Leslie transformed him. And then
Mm-hmm.
after she had done all of the transforming, unfortunately, she had to go. And but she never really truly left, because she left the best parts of herself in Jess's heart. And
Right.
after that, at the end, you see that Jess was with his younger sister, and then he creates Terabithia with her. And
Mm-hmm.
of course, him and his younger sister have a different type of relationship than, you know, like him and Leslie did. You know what I mean? Or
Right.
maybe it was similar in the sense that, like, not necessarily an attraction, but like just like, you know, having that deep connection. Like now he's able to build a deep connection with his younger sister, um,
Mhm.
because of what Leslie had built with him. And so there's a lot of people in our lives where if we don't see the purpose of why
Mhm.
they're there, which this is perfect for like coming into this new year. If you don't look ahead to see the purpose of why this person is here, then you might misinterpret what that purpose is. And if you misinterpret the purpose of something, if you use something outside of its purpose, then you pervert it. And then once you pervert it, then it can cause like a lot of damage, in the long run. And how
Mhm.
would you distinguish romantic and platonic relationships?
Um, man, it's kind of tough, because I think I feel like it's tough in the sense of like I feel like something's going platonic, and then someone else is just like, no, this is definitely not platonic. You're trying to
Mm-hmm.
friend zone me, right? I think it's tough in that sense because you know making sure that it's a mutual kind of situation. But how I usually see it out is like I I really try to look past a person's looks because I think that's something that my mom really instilled in me, and all of my siblings at a really young age is just like look past people's looks and yeah they may be attractive but they may be ugly on the inside or maybe you don't find them attractive but they could have such a beautiful soul that that's what makes them awesome. So I think it's just one of those things where you have to sit and you have to forcibly, well, I guess be intentional about like, okay, how am I going to get to know this person? Is this something that like this person's going to help me learn, or is it just going to be a situation where it's like, I don't, where they're checking out, or the person is like, checking off some things on my list and a romantic partner, and it also depends on, is that what I'm looking for right now? Am I strictly just looking for friends or, I think that's kind of the situation, but
Yeah.
it's really hard to get both parties, both sexes to actually come to that agreement. Or, I mean, I guess to kind of be mature enough to recognize that, I guess.
Well, for those who do know of like Victorious, pretty much like there was two characters on there named Andre and Tori. So Tori was like the main character, Victoria Justice, and then there was like Andre. And throughout the whole series, Andre and Tori, like they spent a lot of time together. They did a lot of like duets together, and they have like a squad. So like there's like a group of them that's like always, hanging out. And then Andre and Tori, their specific dynamic is like actual, like just best friends. Like, like Andre will show up to Tori's house, they'll be chilling, they'll be writing like music together, and they just seem like very comfortable. I felt like you're familiar with like the Greek terms. Like you'll see like some ludus go on with them, where like they might like throw something at each other and like they'll laugh. So it could be interpreted as flirting, I guess. But you can still tell that their true nature of their dynamic is platonic, because it
Mm-hmm.
even got to points like where Andre was interested in other women and Tori would help out Andre. Like Tori would like give Andre advice, and then vice versa. And it wasn't out of like a, well, why isn't he interested in me kind of thing. Like there was no
Right.
jealousy there. Like she genuinely wanted her best friend to have love. And I saw people stating how like, well, why don't they get together? They just need to get together. They just need to get
Right.
together. And as I watched through the whole series, I was so glad that, spoiler alert, they never got together.
Yeah, which is good.
Yeah, like because I feel like that's the ideal that I see in society. I would like to have um guys and girls like have a level of closeness or intimacy, depth,
Mm-hmm.
where they can be cool with each other like that, but then still, like understand that just because they have that type of depth, it doesn't like bleed into like a romantic, like it doesn't mean that it has to be romantic.
Right.
I genuinely feel like they both would say like, oh yeah, Tori is attractive. Like, oh yeah, Andre is attractive. But just like how you said, like I don't see him that way. Guys, it seemed like they never really learned how to just have a deep connection with people, without making it romantic or stopping it before it was gay. And so, because of that, for me, who always wanted that type of depth of connection, I was drawn more to women. And
Mhm.
because I saw myself as like, okay, well, you know what? I would much rather just have people mistake me for liking the girls that I'm like hanging out with, and than to have guys think that I'm gay, or to
Right.
have people think the guys I'm trying to connect with are gay for whatever reason. Um,
Right.
and through that, that's helped me also a lot with like my emotional intelligence, because women, according to my experience, have been so open with like the way that they emote, and helping me to be able to understand like the other gender and everything.
I think that eh, humans, we're relational beings, right?
Mm,
We crave relationships, and anyone who says like, "Oh no," like they're a liar. We're just we're we you got to have some type of relationship in
right.
some shape, form, and fashion with someone. You cannot just be like this isolated human being.
Mhm,
And so I think that we have this idea that relationships are only supposed to be when it comes to the same sex, it has to be very shallow.
mhm,
Especially with men, I feel like men, the relationship between men to men is very shallow because, like you said, no one wants to come off like, oh, I don't want to be seen as gay, like
mhm,
and it's like, what? Like, no, it doesn't, like, what? And so I feel like when it comes to females, we don't have a problem
mhm.
getting as deep with a fellow female. We
Yeah.
we you know we crave that girlfriend kind of connection where we can just sit and talk, that sisterly kind of connection.
Mhm,
And so it's not a problem with us. But then when it comes to the opposite sex, we have this idea that if you want to have a relationship with the opposite sex, it just has to be romantic. And so
mhm.
and it's like, okay, we got to break down that wall, because one, men should be able to have that close relationship with another man, and it not be seen as a romantic, because then there you
Yeah.
go, you're putting a romance stamp on it,
Right.
that just because you're trying to have a deep connection with someone, that you have some type of feelings. It's like, no, let's move romance out of all of this.
Mhm,
It's like, let's just have this brotherly kind of love, this sibling kind of love, to where we build intimacy just on those intellectual wavelengths.
mhm.
And
Yeah.
so I think
Yeah.
it's just, when we get past that,
Mhm,
I think a lot of people will be able to connect, and across the sexes, and women should be able to have men as friends and it not go anywhere, and
yeah.
men should be able to have men as friends and it be really deep.
Yeah.
So then because I feel like if men were to be able to go past that barrier, I
Mhm.
feel like a lot of men would be more open to their emotions,
Yes.
more in tune, and then they
Absolutely.
would be able to understand females a little bit
Yeah.
better, and we would
Uh-huh.
coexist a little bit more. There
Mhm,
wouldn't be these angry, like, oh, men are trash, and then like,
mhm.
oh, all women want this, this, and this, or
Right.
women are too needy. Like,
Yeah.
we would be able to understand each other a lot more.
Yeah,
So
I totally agree. Because
mhm.
then we're not speaking against romantic relationships. We need
No.
those to continue to procreate. You know what I mean? Yeah, that's like the
Yeah.
thing. But I think like the biggest thing that we're trying to put out here is like knowing when it's supposed to be romantic and when it's supposed to be platonic.
Yeah.
And just putting more thought into that,
Hmm.
aside from just oh, they look good, or like, oh, I'm blocking this because we're going too deep.